العلم أشراف مطلوب وطالبه لله أكرام من يمشي على قدمه. العلم نور مبين يستضيء به أهل السعادات والجهال في الظلم.
باب الخيار. باب الخيار. باب الخيار means the option to buy or to continue the transaction. And this is where refunds and exchanges come into it. طيب. So we need to know the definition and its types. Obviously we're going to study these in the book. Lakin I'm going to give you a brief overview before going into the book. As for the ta'rif or the definition of al-khiyar, it is al-akhdhu, it is taken بخير الأمرين, the better of the two options, من إمضاء العقد, of carrying on the transaction or the عقد, أو فسخه, or declaring it void and returning the items that you wanted, meaning not continuing the عقد. Some of them say طلب خير الأمرين, same thing. الأخذ بخير الأمرين, to take the better of the two options. So for example, you may buy something and then you find out that, no, do you know what, I don't want it, I don't need this, so I want to get a refund. طيب, in that case, it's better for you to imda' al-aqd or fasakh, to do fasakh. طيب, to end the contract there, or to end the transaction there. Min imda' al-aqdi, or you can say the better of the two options is that I continue, so that I buy the item and then the person goes and I go and that's it. That's the end of the transaction, meaning I've bought the item and I haven't returned it. So that's the ta'rif of it. That's the definition. I.e., whether to continue on with the transaction or whether to stop the transaction. That's the definition. طيب. Lakin there are types of khiyar. There are types of khiyar. And in general, why is khiyar, why do we have an option to buy? In order to prevent harm that is currently present, or prevent harm that will come about, that comes about after the aqd. In order to prevent a harm, a darar, that comes before the aqd, or during the aqd. Or to prevent a harm, a darar that comes after the aqd. That is the wisdom behind, that's the wisdom behind al-khiyar. Briefly, some of the types of khiyar is khiyarul majlis. And the meaning of khiyarul majlis is that you have an option to buy or to return the item for as long as you're with the person. For as long as you're with the person. So for example, I want to buy a mobile phone of Abdullah. And me and Abdullah are in this same room now. This is called the majlis of the aqd. It is the place that we're buying and selling. It doesn't have to be a gathering, a sitting. It could be us standing. It doesn't have to be indoors. It could be outdoors. So that is khiyarul majlis. So for as long as me and Abdullah are in this majlis together, in this room together, in this gathering together, I can say to him, listen, I want my phone, I want my money back, I don't want this phone. And he has to give it back to me. Khiyarul shard, me and Abdullah give an agreement or have a stipulate a condition and say, I'm going to take this item, I'm going to keep it for 3 days. I'm going to keep it for 3 days, I'm going to try it out. This mobile phone or this car, I'm going to try it out for 3 days. If I like it, I'll continue with the transaction. If not, then I'll return it. Khiyarul ghubn or ghaban, that is when you've been conned out. You've been ripped off. For example, an item that was meant to be £100, someone sells it to you for £200. Or someone sells it to you for £210. That person that's ghubn. He has given you an item and he has charged you excessively. And we studied a bit of that when we were talking about auctions. Auctions, if a person comes and that person is he's in agreement or he's friends with the person that's selling the item, or even on eBay, he keeps lifting up the price and you keep going up, thinking that this is a genuine buyer, but in reality he's not a genuine buyer. So if you find out that you've been ripped off excessively, meaning there's a big difference, then you're allowed to go back and get a refund. Khiyar at-tadlis. At-tadlis is when you give an item to someone after you've done something to it to increase its price. So you've done something to your item to increase the price, okay, to increase the price, or something to decrease the price. To increase the price, مثلا, if I've got a car and I want to sell the car to Abdullah, and on the clock of the car it's gone 100,000 miles. Now 100,000 miles means the car should be a lot cheaper, right? It should be cheap. But I reset the clock and I set it to about 20,000. That is tadlis. You've deceived the person. So once the person finds out you've deceived him, the buyer can come back to you and say, I want a refund. Khiyarul aib is when you sell something that is defective to someone, something that has a defect on it. طيب. مثلا, a car. And then you find out there's something wrong with the engine. There's something wrong with the engine. What you're allowed to do is go back and get a refund. Or khiyar ikhtilaf al-mutabayi'in. Or the two people that are selling items to one another have a dispute over how much it actually was. So for example, I say to Abdullah, I'm going to sell you this house for 300,000. 300,000. And he says, طيب. Abdullah takes the house, and then I come back to him in a month's time and I say, give me my 350,000. He says, la, what do you mean 350,000? The agreement was 300,000. Again, there's khiyar there. They both, one takes the house back and one takes the amount back, his money back. Khiyar al-ru'ya. Khiyar al-ru'ya is the option if you buy something without actually seeing it and it hasn't been described to you. Khiyar al-ru'ya. If you buy something without actually seeing it. If you buy something without actually seeing it, and then it turns out to be very different to what you thought it would be, then you've got an option to take it back. طيب. So that is a summary of the bab. يقول الشيخ عبد الرحمن الناصر السعدي رحمه الله باب الخيار وغيره, the bab of the khiyar and other than that. طيب. So we said the khayr, and the khiyar or the option is of two things. It's one of two. You have a khiyar لدفع ضرر متوقع. You have a khiyar لدفع ضرر متوقع. So you have a khiyar, an option to prevent a harm that is going to come or that could come during the aqd or just before the aqd. And that is for khiyar the first two. That is for the first two. Or خيار لدفع ضرر واقع بعد خيار. نعم. لدفع ضرر واقع ووقع بعد العقد. So you're now trying to remove a harm that has come to you after the transaction. It entails both. And that would be the remaining five. خيار الغبن, تدليس, عيب, and so on.
How would you determine the money that was put? You said that the two transactions differ in the amount. So how would you determine, if I do buy a house, how do I know how much money, like, because we're different about the money amount?
I haven't given you the money yet though.
Oh, I see.
The whole, what brought about the khilaf is the fact that I haven't given you the money. But if I've given you the money, khalas. Yani if I've given you £300,000 and I've taken the house, طيب, you're selling the house and I've got 300,000. Yani you give me, I buy the house from you. I buy the house from you. Now you take the cash and I take the house. That's different. We know you wouldn't have taken the house unless you if I was happy with the amount of money that I'm giving. The khilaf is on if I don't give you the cash, if you've taken the house but I haven't given you the money yet. Surah al-Masala, lahda. Surah al-Masala. Abdullah has a mobile phone. And I want to buy that mobile phone from him. Abdullah gives me the mobile phone and I say, I'm going to give you the money, 2 weeks' time. Have I given him money? La. Then 2 weeks' time, obviously let's say we agreed on, I don't know, £500. When it's time for me to pay the money, in 2 weeks, I say, Abdullah, there's your £450. He says, la, we agreed on, sisters, if you can please pass on some chairs through the back. We agreed on 500. So that's where the khilaf comes. It could only come if we haven't exchanged the cash. Other than that, obviously, if beforehand, if you would have exchanged the cash, then yeah, there'd be no khilaf. طيب. What is the athar of the khiyar? What is the after effect? What is the effect of the khiyar? Meaning, if we do have khiyar now, what is the reason for it? Or what wisdom is there? Or what comes after the khiyar? For example, if I say majlis al-khiyar, we're in this majlis and I'm buying an item from Abdullah. Abdullah, I say to him, listen, let's buy this and whatever. And then we depart, as we shall see in the first one. We depart. He goes outside and I go somewhere else. There's no khiyar in that case. Because the khiyar al-majlis has ended. Because we've departed from one another. So that means he continues with whatever it was, or he takes whatever he takes advantage and uses whatever he bought, and I take advantage of the money that I've taken. However, if we're in the aqd, actually we leave that for now anyway. We'll start on it, and then when we're looking at the explanation, we'll see. The Shaykh says, rahimahullah, وَإِذَا وَقَعَ الْعَقْدُ, if the contract takes place, صَارَ لَازِمًا, it becomes binding. It becomes binding. إِلَّا بِسَبَبٍ مِنَ الْأَسْبَابِ إِلَّا بِسَبَبٍ مِنَ الْأَسْبَابِ الشَّرْعِيَّةِ. طيب. The Shaykh says, rahimahullah, if the contract takes place, طيب, the contract takes place, صَارَ لَازِمًا, it becomes binding. طيب. Unless there's a legitimate reason for it not to be binding. Unless there's a legitimate reason. So for example, I buy an item from Abdullah. We depart. He can't come back to me and say, listen, give me my phone. Whether I want to give him his phone back is something else. But he has no legitimate right to say, listen, give me back my phone. I don't even want the bait anymore. I don't want to sell it anymore. I've changed my mind. He can't say that to me. Why? Because he's now departed the gathering, the majlis. Okay? لكن إلا بسبب من الأسباب الشرعية, except for a reason that is shari'i, legitimate reason. For example, I sold him a phone that was these fake phones that are not actually phones that are displays in the shop. He buys it, takes it, and then he goes away. He can come back to me, whether it's 2 days later or 3 days later, and say, this is what you sold me. I don't know if it still happens, but what used to happen is some of the gypsies, they used to sell mobile phones to people or laptops, and then they would change the boxes, and then when you get home or when you get to your car, you find that you've got 2 bags of sugar on you. but you don't actually have the phone. So in that case, the person can come back. That's a legitimate reason. These legitimate reasons we're going to study now. Is that understood? طيب. خيار المجلس, that's the very first one. فمنها, the Shaykh says, فمنها, meaning some of these legitimate reasons are what? The very first is خيار المجلس. خيار المجلس, which is the first one. And the murad or the meaning is مكان التبايع. The murad or the meaning is مكان التبايع, where the transaction is taking place. So just because you hear majlis, it doesn't mean that they have to be sitting down in a living room or whatever. It could be anywhere that they are. We could be standing, we could be on a bus, we could be in a car, we could be in a hall like this, we could be in the desert, we could be out in an open and park. That is wherever you are when the transaction is taking place. طيب. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and the evidence for this is the hadith of the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم. إذا تبايع رجلان, if two men buy and sell, if they conduct a sale. طيب. رجلان, I suppose امرأتان don't come into it, huh? But لكن the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم تبايع رجلان. عموم الرجال, women don't come into الرجال. عموم would be if you say Abdullah comes into it, Ismail comes into it, Sulaiman, Mubarak, all of you come into it because you're رجال. We can't say women come into رجال. اللفظ غير مقصود. يعني the word in رجلان is غير مقصود. It is غير مقصود or خرج مخرج الغالب, they say. It's just that it is common on the tongues, and the Messenger would probably be sallallahu alaihi wasallam sitting with, in his gathering would be men, so it doesn't specify it to two men. إذا تبايع رجلان فكل واحد منهما, every one of them, فكل واحد منهما بالخيار, every one of them has an option. Every one of them has an option. ما لم يتفرقا, for as long as they don't depart. وَكَانَا جَمِيعًا, and they were together, and they were both together. وَكَانَا جَمِيعًا. أو يخير أحدهما الآخر, or one of them gives an option to the other, gives him an option. فإن خير أحدهما, if one of them gives the other one an option. فتبايع, option meaning saying that you have no option to, I have no option to do fasq or to get rid of the aqd. As soon as we make the aqd, it is binding. If one of them says this, and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, فَتَبَايَعَ وَلَمْ يَتْرُكْ وَاحِدٌ مِّنْهُمَا الْبَيْعِ فَقَدْ وَجَبَ الْبَيْعِ. Then the bay' becomes binding. طيب, let's look at the hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, فَكُلُّ وَاحِدٌ مِّنْهُمَا بِالْخِيَارِ. For as long as they are in that مَا لَمْ يَتَفَرَّقَا, for as long as they are in that gathering, then they have a khiyar, they have an option. So for example, I'm selling an item to Abdullah, and then we say, listen, sell me this, whatever, phone, sell me a phone. And he says, طيب, I'll sell it to you for £500. طيب. And then we carry on talking about other things. So we've literally, I've taken the phone, he has taken the money. He's put the money in his pocket and I've put the money in my phone, put the phone in my pocket. Fahimtum? Understood? طيب. You would think the transaction ends there, innit? طيب. Then, half an hour later, whilst me and Abdullah are still sitting, 10, 20 minutes, half an hour later, or an hour later, whilst we're still sitting and we're talking, whatever it may be that we're talking about, I say, Abdullah, I don't even need the phone. I remembered that someone else was going to get me a phone anyway. A family member who's travelled abroad was going to get me a phone from abroad, so please take your money back. Is this permissible or not? Naam, it is permissible. Why? Naam, excellent. Because they are in the gathering. ما لم يتفرقا, for as long as they do not depart. طيب. أو يخير أحدهما الآخر. Okay. فإن خير, naam. Or one of them says, listen, we're going to buy the items now, or we're going to conduct the sale now, but as soon as we conduct the sale, I have no option. I want the actual contract to be binding from there onwards, so there's no khiyar for me. That's fine. I can say, طيب, as soon as I take it, then for me it is binding. Or we can say both of us can agree and say the aqd is binding. So whether we're sitting here for the next 10 hours or not, we can't go back on things. We can also say that. Why? Because the haqq is for me and him, so it is whatever we agree upon. There's no third party and there's no one else that's going to be harmed by it. طيب. What is the meaning behind نعم لا ما لم يتفرقا وكانا جميعا. طيب. What about if a person decides to run away immediately? And Abdullah gives me the phone, he takes the money and he runs away immediately. Is this permissible? He's left the gathering, He's left. So he says, "Start, take that." I'll give it to him, and he runs out the door. Is this permissible? permissible, huh?
Yeah, maybe he has a reason to go. He's missing a bus.
Maybe he's running to a bus.
Yeah.
So he's allowed to do that, yeah?
Just imagine.
No? The sisters, do you think he's allowed to do that?
No, if it's been stipulated otherwise.
Say that again?
If it's been stipulated otherwise.
La, there's no conditional, they haven't placed anything down. So it's a straight transaction. No one's placed any conditions or anything. And as soon as the transaction's done, he goes. Depending on? So if he's running for a bus, it's okay, but if he's not, what?
If he's doing it because he gives him
If he runs away, but if they're both pleased with the transaction, then it's okay.
There's actually a nas, a hadith specific to this situation. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ولا يحل له أن يفارق صاحبه خشية أن يستقيله. ولا يحل, it is not permissible. له, for that person, for me or Abdullah, for any of the two people that are buying or selling, the buyer or the seller, أن يفارق صاحبه, that he leaves his friend. Yani the person that he's selling to, he leaves him and he goes away from him. خشية أن يستقيله, for fear that he will ask for a refund or for fear that he will cancel the transaction. Is that understood? It is not permissible because otherwise anyone can do that. طيب. نعم ما لم يتفرقا. What is considered تفرق? Departing. What can be considered departing? Physical departure.
So I've got someone that if for example, let's say we're in this room and he goes to the toilet, comes back, he's left the room with the register, has he
Okay, so Abdullah said if he leaves the room,
No, I'm saying that count. I'm saying
would that count?
yeah, physically.
La, if he's asking, listen, let me just quickly go to the toilet, I'll come back.
Yeah.
Then it could be said that it doesn't count because he's leaving, immediately coming back for a need. It's like if his alarm is going off outside in the car and he quickly runs out, turns the alarm off, and then comes back in. That you can say that's not included.
Both parties understand what he's going for.
La, I'm saying what can be considered departing. The Messenger said, "Ma lam yatafarraqa." What is tafarruq? Yani what can be considered departing? Giving salams. طيب السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Whilst they're both still sitting.
Leaving the person aside.
Whatever is considered in the custom, in the norm. The Messenger said, "Ma lam yatafarraqa," as long as they do not depart and leave one another. Whatever is considered tafarruq in the custom, normally, then that is tafarruq. Mathalan, for example, now, if a person is in this room, or if we're in a big house, mathalan, this sort of hall, a person leaves the hall and goes to another hall, or goes to another office. That is considered leaving. If they're out in the open, if they're in the park, for example, and they're doing the transaction in the park, as soon as they stand and walk away from one another, and they start to walk away from one another, that walking away is the tafarruq in that case. Also, what about a phone conversation? If I'm talking to someone over the phone, is there khiyar majlis? Where's the khiyar majlis? Huh? Like, where is the majlis? Where is the khiyar majlis? Where's the gathering? The phone line is the gathering. طيب. When does it end? ما لم يتفرق. When does it end? Huh? When the call ends. When the call ends is when you end the transaction. طيب. The scholars also talk about the next mas'ala with regards what is permissible to do, to have khiyar on. What sort of transaction? Al-bay' is permissible to do. Al-bay', al-ijara, buying and selling. Also al-ijara, when you're renting, hiring out. As-sulh, when you're agreeing on something. طيب. Lakin there are certain uqood that you don't get khiyar majlis. For example, meaning you don't have a choice. Nikah, مثلا. Nikah, when you do the aqd of nikah, you can't say, listen, I've changed my mind, I don't like the sister's father, give my money. Let's end the contract there. La, it's not permissible. Because it's aqd that is binding immediately and there's no khiyar in it. Also, that's not considered bay'. Likewise, talaq. Talaq, you can't say طلقتك or أنت طالق and then 10 minutes later say, listen, we're still in the kitchen, I haven't left the kitchen, so the majlis, khiyar majlis takes place. La. طيب. So that's the first one, khiyar al-majlis. ومنها also khiyar al-shagd, having a khiyar of shagd, placing a condition. Placing a condition. قال الشيخ رحمه الله إذا شرط الخيار لهما أو لأحدهما مدة معلومة قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم المسلمون على شروطهم إلا شرطا أحل حراما أو حرم حلالا. طيب. The next is if one of the two, if the buyer and the seller, if they agree to test the two items out or test one of the items out, okay, for a duration of مثلا 3 days or 4 days or 5 days, then that khiyar, that choice, it includes or entails that 5-day period or that 3-day period. So for example, I buy a car from Abdullah and I say, I want to test it out. I want to test the car out for 3 days. And he says, طيب ما في مشكلة. 3 days, you can do that. You can keep the car for 3 days, and if you don't like it, then you can bring it back. And if you like it, then after 3 days, the aqd, the contract becomes binding. So after the first 2 days, Abdullah brings the car back, says, I don't like it anymore. Khalas. You can just bring it back. Because that's a condition that they placed. And the haqq is lahuma. The haqq is between them. And the Messenger ﷺ said, Al-Muslimuna ala shurutihim. The Muslimun are on their shurut, yani they abide by their shurut and their conditions. The Messenger Allah Jalla wa Ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu awfu bil uqud, O you who believe, fulfill your contracts. So your contract in this case, was that 3 days or 4 days or more? The scholars talk about what's the longest period that you can have a condition. Some say 3 days, which are the majority of scholars. And the Hanabila say la, it's more than 3 days, 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever it may be, as long as they mention a certain time. For example, they say a month. Well, you can't say a month or 3 weeks or 1 week, as long as you've mentioned the date for the khiyar to end, for the option to end. Like if you say, for some time, let me think about this for some time and then I'll get back to you. That's not permissible. Why? Why is that not permissible? Unclear. And that is called gharar. Bay'ul gharar and majhul. The ajal, the period is majhul. طيب خيار الشرط.
See that one? Jahala is not is knowing that you're going to get something but not knowing what it is.
La, the jahala that's involved in this case, the scenario that we mentioned, is the mudda, the time.
And the gharar is the same thing.
Well, gharar and jahala, we said that they can mean the same thing. So here, they can mean the same, both uncertainty. So the gharar could, because the item, you already know the item that you've got. Rather, you can say the item or gharar is pertaining to the item. So the car, you don't know if you're going to take it or not, because you're not fully aware of what it is. Like in the mudda, the time frame is connected to majhul, it's jahala. You don't know, it could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. طيب. ومنهما إذا غبن غبنا يخرج عن العادة. And from it, and from the khiyar is the third one, إذا غبن غبنا, if he's charged or overpriced, if the item is overpriced, excessively, something which is out of the norm, which is outside of the norm, then there's khiyar in this situation as well, and it's called khiyar al-ghubn or ghabni, which is the third one. Note or underline where the Shaykh says anil ada, what is considered the ada, the norm. For example, if I want to buy a watch, and the watch is usually about £30. Let's say the watch is £50. and he charges me £55. Is that excessive? No, £55, it's okay. 55, 56, 57, it's okay. Like, what if he charges me £100 for a watch that is £50? That is way over the top, sah? £50, yani that's a lot of money to be. That's too excessive. Or even 120, even 130. طيب? So that person has the option to go back and say, listen, you overpriced, or you overcharged me for this item, give me my money back. Or give me the amount of money back that you were meant to, or take however much you were meant to take. For example, £50. That's how much the watch is in the market. Take that £50, give me my extra £50. You can also say that. Imma binajishin, whether it's via najish. Najish is, for example, auction, where a person who doesn't really want to buy the item increases the price. Increases the price. That could be for various reasons. It could be because he hates the person that's buying the item, or it could be because he has an agreement with the one that is selling the item. Because if the price is high, who benefits? The seller benefits. طيب. Or it could be he's just faduli, he has nothing better to do, and he's got extra time on his hands, spare time on his hand, and he just goes on to eBay or just goes to auctions and for the fun of it just goes increasing prices on people. Or تلقي الجلب. What is تلقي الجلب? Put your hand up if you know تلقي الجلب. تلقي الجلب.
It's when the Bedouins come to the city and then the people in the city go to meet them halfway in order to...
Excellent, that is تلقي الجلب. And what was the hukum of تلقي الجلب when we passed it several weeks ago? What is the ruling? It is haram, it is not permissible. طيب. Second ruling, what if it does take place? طيب, it is haram, we know, but it's just happened. How do we rectify it? What's the solution? They can get their money back immediately. Miskhiyar. They have the option. If that person reaches the market, they can say, listen, you ripped me off, give my money back. Or they can say, khali wali, I can't be bothered going back and taking the item, therefore I'll carry on. طيب. Is that just for Bedouins? Who can give me a more contemporary example? Huh?
People coming up from outside the city, what you do?
Coming outside the city. So like it's people living outside London, go on. A tourist that's selling items, yani.
So when you go to a different country, because you don't know how much things cost.
La, that's different. You're not buying and selling here. I'm talking about talaq al-jalib. He's got items that he wants to sell. For example, someone comes to London and selling an item, any item, and he doesn't know what the price is, what the norm is. And then someone meets him at the airport, says, listen, this item it's not even worth a third of what you're selling it for.
Say a farmer comes from like countryside and he comes to like a city to sell land. Somebody meets him before he reaches the city, say, oh, these prices have gone down, I'll give you a better price before he gets to the city.
Yeah. before he gets to the city. So if a farmer comes towards the city, and then even before he gets to the city, people meet him. طيب. أو غيرهما. It doesn't have to be auctions. It doesn't have to be talaq al-jalab. If someone sells an item to another person and he excessively charges him, he overcharges him, then that person has the right to be to carry on or to get his refund. What if a person doesn't want his refund back? Is that permissible anyway, to con people out? No, to con people out. That's haram, sah? Is it permissible? No. Why is the aqd not fasid? Why? يعني منجش, for example, it meets the shurut, it meets the conditions. But it's haram, najish. وَلَا تَنَاجِشُ, the Prophet ﷺ said. So, طيب. It is not haram in of itself, it's an attribute outside of the transaction. Also, there's another tabid that the scholars mentioned. If something is haram for the sake of Allah, Jalla wa ala, then it stays haram and it is fasid. You can't rectify it. For example, if you pray the salah without wudu, or if a person drinks alcohol, or khamr, wal-'iyadu billah, or fawahish, that is haram. So that action takes, or even riba. Riba is haram, lihaqqillah. For the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah made it haram. Therefore, if you do riba, the aqd is fasid immediately, sah? طيب. What about if a person does something like this, where he overcharges someone? We said it is not fasid immediately. It is not corrupt immediately. It is not invalid immediately. It goes back to what? The person himself that is being conned or ripped off. Why? Because that is the haqq of Adami. It's his right. It is not specifically the right of Allah Jalla wa Ala. It is the right of the person that you're selling it to. طيب. So that's the third one. وَمِنْهَا خِيَارُ تَدْلِيسِ. And from it is خِيَارُ تَدْلِيسِ, when you're deceiving someone. بأن يدلس البائع على المشتري. And the buyer, or afwan, the seller, he deceives the person that is buying the item. ما يزيد به الثمن. So where it says ما يزيد به الثمن, underline that. So he deceives this person and he makes the item to seem more expensive than it, better than it actually is. Better than it actually is. For example, if the car has a lot of scratches and the car is damaged, and then he paints all of the damages so the person can't see it, and he goes to him at 9 p.m. at night when it's dark, he says, this brand new car, and there's no damages or anything like that. That is called what? Tadlis. You've deceived this person. طيب, the Shaykh mentioned an example that the Prophet ﷺ also gave a hadith regarding كَتَصْرِيَةِ اللَّبَنِ فِي ضَرْعِ بَهِيمَةِ الْأَنْعَامِ. Surah al-Mas'ala, a person he owns camels, for example. And camels, or the she-camel, is often milked in the morning and in the evening. In the morning and in the evening, it is milked. طيب. And the milk that you get from any she-camel is different. Some of them are plentiful, some of them you get a whole litre, some of them you get half a litre. طيب. So tasriyatul laban means a farmer or a Bedouin who owns camels. He wants to sell this camel in the market in 4 days. So what does he do? For the next 2-3 days, he doesn't milk it in the morning and in the afternoon. He doesn't milk the camel. So on the third day, he takes it to the market. And a person tests the she-camel and he finds that it's got a lot of milk. And he says, Wallahi, mashallah, this is how it is normally. Every morning I get this amount out and every evening I get this amount out. Is that true technically? La. Why? Because he hasn't milked it for 2 or 3 days. So the Messenger ﷺ prohibited this in a hadith, and he said, لا تصروا الإبل والغنم. Do not do this act of not milking the sheep or the ibil, the camels. فمن ابتاعها بعد فإنه بخير النظرين بعد أن يحتلبها. If a person buys it and then he goes home, so the first day or two, mashallah. Lakin after the third, fourth day, he notices that it is average. It is nowhere near what it milked, or it is nowhere near what it milked on the first or the second day. The Messenger ﷺ said, فإنه بخير النظرين بعد أن يحتلبها. Then he can choose whichever is better for him after he has milked it. In sha'a amsak. If he wants, he can just carry on. He goes, he says, for example, I can't be bothered going back to the city and getting another one. Or I can't be bothered going out and getting another one. So I'll just keep this. He's allowed. وَإِنْ شَاءَ رَدَّهَا. And if he wants, he can return it back. He can return it back to this person that tricked him, that deceived him. وَصَاعٍ يعني رَدَّهَا وَصَاعٍ مِنْ تَمَرٍ. And he returns a sa', 1.5 kilos of dates. Or 2 kilos and a half of dates, almost 3 kilos of dates. طيب. Why is muttafiqun alayh? Why is he returning back dates? Because he milked it. So what has that person got? The option of what? That is called khiyaru tadlis. He's been tricked, he's been deceived. Therefore, he can either go back to the person that sold it to him and say, listen, take your camel back and take 3 kilos roughly of dates for the milk that I used. Or he can say, I'm going to keep the item, keep the she-camel. Is that understood? طيب. A more contemporary example. If I sell a car, the example I mentioned earlier on, a car, has about 70,000 on the clock or 100,000 on the clock. And then I reset the clock to make it appear as if it is, in reality, 20 or 15,000 on the clock. Like that person takes it and he doesn't know anything about cars. Then his friend who's a mechanic starts the engine and he listens to the car and he goes, this car is not, it doesn't sound brand new. It seems like it's been on the road for about 10 years, 15 years. Then he does a few checks and he finds out that the clock has been reset. Obviously that's haram, صح? من غشنا فليس منا. Like, what is that person? What option has he got? He's got an option of keeping it, just like this example, or returning it back, طيب. He's got an option of returning it back or keeping the item. Lakin it has to be something which changes the actual amount, changes the amount of the item. Lakin if the car's got a few scratches here and there, that doesn't really decrease the price of the car a great deal. A few scratches here and there, not bumps, just a few scratches. Almost every single car's got a few scratches on it. So that doesn't decrease the price of the item, of the car that has been sold.
What's your saying?
Huh?
Does he still give back 2.5 kg?
La. The scholars say that this mas'ala is mansoos alayha. There's a nas, there's a text for the example of milking camels and so on. However, anything else, then he just returns the item. Because it's his fault. The person that's selling it, he deceived him. So the fact that he's had my car for 3 days, you can't say, give me the rent for 3 days. Why? Because it's your fault. You had an assumption that I was going to bring it back. Or there was a possibility of me bringing it back. And you took the risk. Naam. Abdullah.
You see, so in that case, what if he was driving a car for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and the mileage increased, and when the clock gets taken back to how it originally was, does he have to compensate for that amount?
No, it doesn't compensate for the mileage. Same example. He doesn't compensate for the mileage that was used. طيب. وإن اشترى معيبا, if a person buys a defective item, ولم يعلم عيبه فله الخيار بين رده وإمساكه. Now we're on خيار العيب, the fifth one. وإن اشترى معيبا, if a person buys an item that is defective, it has a defect on it, an item that is broken or that isn't working properly. لم يعلم عيبه, he did not know that it had this defect. Who didn't know? يعلم من? The buyer, نعم. The buyer did not know. فله الخيار, he has an option of بين رده وإمساكه. He has an option of buying it. He has an option of keeping it or returning it. He has an option of keeping it and returning it if he did not know of the aib. طيب. What if he knew of the aib? If he knew that this defect, the car was, if there was a defect in the car or in the item that you were selling. What is the mafhum? لم يعلم عيبه. He did not know of his aib. If he knows of the aib, he doesn't have the option. Why? Because you knew. You knew what you're getting yourself into. طيب. What about if a person sells an item and he knows it has a defect? He knows it has a defect. Like, and he doesn't tell the person, the buyer. Has he got khiyar there? The person, I'm selling you a mobile phone. I know there's something wrong with the mobile phone and I don't tell you. What option have you got? The buyer. The buyer, Abdullah in this case. I sell him an item and I know there's a defect on it. I'm selling the phone and I know the phone has got something wrong with it. What is Abdullah? What option has he got? Keep it or return it. The same as the last one. He's got an option of keeping it or returning it. What if I say, or what if the seller says, I did not even know that it had this item, it had this aib. Hmm?
That's not the buyer's problem.
That's not? It's not the buyer's problem. It's not the buyer's problem. طيب, what if I say to Abdullah, listen, I'm sending you this phone, but I really don't know if there's anything wrong with it because I've just bought it. I bought it about 2 hours ago. The stock has just come in and I'm giving you this item now. I have no idea if it's got any aib.
Can you check?
He's taken the item.
If you find out that there's a defect,
Yeah.
pay for the defect.
No, that's something else. We're coming to that.
Unless you put a shot, but if you find a aib, then I'll give you something.
No, he says, listen, I don't know if there's anything with this item.
You took it with that risk.
He took it with that risk. The scholars say in that case, he doesn't have, because he's warned him, and he doesn't know. He's warned him and he doesn't know. طيب. فإن تعذر رده. So if a person wants to return the item that had a defect, however, تعذر رده, it is no longer possible for him to return the item. What happens then? Don't look at the book, look at me. Don't look at the book. What happens then? Huh? Who pays the difference?
The seller.
The seller pays who the difference? The one that is buying it. Anyone else?
Something of its value.
Something
Something of its value.
Something of its value?
So, for example, if you're not able to give it back and you realize, for example, something's been used, that you give it of its value and what's been,
Its value?
something of what's left behind it. You mean, like, I'm really saying it.
And what did he say?
The difference.
The difference. طيب. There's something called arsh. Arsh is quite confusing. They say, because he's not, first the Surah al-Mas'ala, مثلا I sell a car to Abdullah. The car has a defect. Lakin, someone burns the car. Can I now return the car? Yeah, because the car's gone, the car's burnt. Lakin, there's something called arsh, which he's entitled to. He gets back some of the worth of the car. And the way they calculate it, it's a bit confusing. It's called arsh. If the car, the ratio or the percentage between the car being sound or being okay and the car being having a defect. So for example, if the car is 100,000 when it's okay, when it has no aib, and it's 80,000 when it has a aib, what's the difference? 20? What? 20,000. What percentage is 20,000 over 100? A fifth. صح? A fifth. طيب. The item, however much I sold it for, I have to give him back a fifth of the item. I have to give him back a fifth of the item. مثلا, the car was how much did I say? 100,000. طيب. I sold the car for 60,000, let's say. I sold the car for 60,000. What is a fifth of 60,000? 12,000. How do you know? Who said that? You said that, huh? When we get to inheritance, inshallah, sit over here for me. I'm going to need you to work out the thumun, the sudus, the rubu'. Yeah? The next chapter, sit over here for me. طيب, 12,000. However, let's see if he's telling the truth. Yeah, wallahi, sah. 12,000. He gives back 12,000. طيب. He gives back 12,000. Yani the buyer gives the seller gives the buyer how much? 12,000 to cover for the aib, the defect. To cover for the defect. طيب. That is aib. What is the mudda though? What period of time for him to find out the defect? We're in khiyar al-aib, sah? Is there a period of time? 3 days?
After the
La. For example, I sell you a car and it has a defect. What period of time has Abdullah got to find out that defect and expose the defect? Is there a period of time? 3 days, 4 days, however long it takes. It has no time limit. It has no time limit. مثلا, for example, I sold you a car, and the tadlis, the aib, مثلا the clock. Remember the example of the clock being wind down, or being reset. That is really considered a aib. It's considered a aib of some sort. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks later. If he finds out then he can still bring the car back. Why? Because that would have definitely taken place before he actually bought the item. Sah? You can't go 80,000 miles within 2-3 weeks, can you? Therefore, it would have taken place with the seller. So he can bring it back. So it doesn't have a mudda. It doesn't have a mudda. It doesn't have a time. وإذا اختلف في الثمن تحالفا. وإذا اختلف في الثمن. That's the example that I mentioned, the number 6. إذا اختلف في الثمن, if they have a dispute over the price. Obviously, the money is not passed over. The money is not passed over. The amount that is meant to be paid is not passed over. And they dispute في الثمن. تحالفا, they take oath. Wallahi, it was this amount. لا, wallahi, it was this amount. ولكل منهما الفسخ. And every one of them has the option of making the transaction void. That's if they want to. It's still within there. And it's still up to them. So for example, I sell Abdullah the house for 300,000, and he thinks I said 250,000. I'm expecting how much from Abdullah? 300,000, sah? And he says, there's your 250,000. Say, la, wallah, it wasn't. It was 300,000. طيب. What should we do now in this circumstance? We take oath and it becomes void immediately. They have the choice. I can say, طيب, 250,000, خلي ولد, there's only 50,000 difference anyway. Take it. Or he can say, طيب, since I respect you, take it for 300,000. So it's up to them. The option is up to them. It's between them, what they want to do.
If one disagrees with the other, you have to both agree.
Yeah, they both have to agree, because you're not going to be happy with paying an extra 50,000, and I'm not going to be happy with being down 50,000. Therefore, we both have to agree. That's why I say وَلِكُلٍّ, the matan. وَلِكُلٍّ, and for every one of them is has a choice. طيب. The Shaykh says rahimahullah, خيار الرؤية, نعم, خيار الرؤية is the last one. It doesn't say it in the matan, lakin basically خيار الرؤية, which is the last one, is if you buy an item and you haven't seen the item before, what can you do? If you have an item and you haven't seen the item before, what can you do? If it doesn't please you, then you can say to him, listen, give me my item, give me my money back.
It's not permissible anyway, because you're buying something which is based on Jahannam.
What if you know the wasf?
You know roughly it's a car, but you don't know, it's permissible. It is permissible. Lakin, you may not know the details of the car. You may not, and he hasn't given you a description, or he hasn't given you a picture of it. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but like in the fuqaha mention it. فمن اشترى ما لم يتقدمه رؤية أو وصف جاز للمشتري خيار رؤية كما تقدم. خيار رؤية. I'm going to buy it from you now, لكن I'm going to have a look at it later on. طيب, that's a bait that is khas. لحظة. Questions after, yeah. The last hadith that the Shaykh says rahimahullah, من أقال مسلما أقاله الله أقال الله عفرته أقاله الله عثرته يوم القيامة, in another narration. طيب. The last hadith talks about if a person buys something, or there's a transaction that takes place between two Muslims or two people, and one of them is not happy with the transaction and he regrets it. مثلا Abdullah, I buy a book from Abdullah and I regret buying this book because it's not worth it, or I didn't have the funds and whatever. That transaction, is it binding upon Abdullah to give me a refund? لا. Lakin iqala is when he nullifies the aqd and he gives me my money back, and I give him back his kitab, his book. He's doing me a favor. And that is mustahab. The hukum of it is that it is mustahab. Because a person can regret something that he sold. He can regret selling an item that he sold. Or he can regret buying an item that he bought. And the fact that it's mustahab is mentioned in the hadith. أَقَالَهُ اللَّهُ عَثْرَتَهُ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise him when he falls. Meaning Allah Jalla wa'ala will forgive him. In another narration, Yawm al-Qiyamah. Meaning the mistakes and the shortcomings you have, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you just like you pardoned this person for the shortcomings that they had. طيب, that's khiyaq, Bab al-Khiyaq done, inshallah. Bab al-Salam, we're going to start next week, inshallah ta'ala.